Greetings and salutations, people of the internet. Austin here. A small bit of housekeeping before I get into the thick of things. For the sake of my sanity and my inferiority complex, I'm no longer requiring a like goal for videos going forward, since I was obsessing on my last video's comparative failure to the Vanik Region's response. So, with that out of the way, I welcome you to my personal favorite region. A region full of monsters and maniacs. The most dangerous region in the Pokemon world. I present the Transylvania and horror movie / sci-fi inspired Vanik region. Frankub, the lone cub Pokemon. So the starters here are based on the big three of the Universal movie monsters, with this tiny little man being based on Frankenstein's monster. So right off the bat, in terms of changes, this got a fair bit of them. I upped the saturation on the green fur, I simplified the fur tufts around the head, and added the lightning bolt strand on the top. But the biggest change was altering the perspective and position of the legs so it felt more balanced. I think this is an easy top 5 grass starter for me. Urstein, the patchwork Pokemon. Of the middle starters in the region, this got the biggest glow up easily, then followed by the water starters middle stage. I gave it the electric type to play into how the monster was brought back to life via lightning bolts, reanimating the body. I shrunk the lower body so the arms were longer. I cut down the number of stitches across the body and added the bright pink to help break up the color scheme and sort of resemble exposed flesh. Overall, a good update for what was otherwise a lackluster Pokemon. Beardabber, the lightning rod Pokemon. Another sizable upgrade in the design department. I would argue the biggest change to this mon was giving it a more defined personality. This thing is a giant teddy bear that can crack your spine with a hug. They would be best friends with Beware. I changed the head shape to resemble the classic monster's head more, make it a little bit more squared off. I simplified the color schemes and I removed a few of the seeds / bolts across the body and made the lightning rod trees on the back slightly bigger. This is my favorite of the 3 starters, and it was my pick to be an actual starter if this was a game. Howlaze, the burning pup Pokemon. This confident little pupper is based on the Wolfman, and honestly this has changed the least out of the base stages going into the reboot. I mainly just shrunk the body, I darkened the red of the fur, and simplified the flame patterns at the ends. This is the better of the 2 Fire Dog starters, despite my love for Chef Flame. Wolferno, the Silver Wolf Pokemon. The changes with this one can be boiled down to proportion and minor color alterations. I moved the legs further apart in a way that actually made more sense to give this thing some semblance of balance, and I moved the arms closer to the body, giving it the impression this thing is about to pounce. I cut down on the orange around the body, mainly removing the toenails in this stage and having the silver take its place. The steel type comes from the silver bullet part of the werewolf mythos, now being used as natural body armor. Lycanflame, the burning howl Pokemon. This changed the least of the final evolutions. I lightened the fur color from the original so it was more in line with the rest of the evolutionary line, and so the other colors stood out a tad more. I made the arms bigger so it felt less human compared to the original. I shrank the legs a smidge, adjusted the shape of the muzzle, and made the tail longer. It sounds like a lot, but compared to the changes for the water starter, this is nothing. The only thing I would change now is to not make the fire blend in so much with the body color-wise. Probably could have darkened the fur color a smidgen. Vamthirst, the dehydrated Pokemon. This changed the most out of the base starter designs, which it desperately needed. This thirsty fella is based on Dracula and vampire bats. I changed the eyes, the ear shape to feel more natural. I made the head slightly bigger, I shrank the wings, and I completely changed the legs to stand out more when compared to the others. This is probably now the most consistent evolution line of the starters. Nosferatu, the Water Fang Pokemon. Another big change, this went from the worst middle stage to probably the best. I simplified the eyes so they'd be easier to read at a glance, completely changed the wing colors to the purple you see now. I darkened the fur color a bit more so that the other blues popped. Changed the leg shapes to feel less human and to lean into the giant bat aspect of the design, alongside the Nosferatu reference. I made it a dark type because, come on, it's a vampire. Of course it's a dark type. Dracoid, the Night Stalker Pokemon. This changed the most out of the final starters by a landslide. I swapped the water fur collar for a fur one since the original didn't read very well despite my attempts to recreate it here. I made the chest look more like Dracula's vest with the teardrop button motif continuing on from the middle stage. I made the pattern on the wings more prevalent, and I added red to the design to pop against the blues of purples, and to, of course, reference blood. This is the best design out of the final evolutions for the starters, but Beardaver is still my favorite. Rabaflosh, the Hidden Rabbit Pokemon. So, the original version of this design was probably the worst Pokemon in the entire Dex in the first pass. I didn't change much with this Pokemon, but what I did do worked wonders. At least comparatively. I made the head bigger so it felt more like a first stage, and I changed the body to be less human-like and be more like your bog-standard rabbit Pokemon. I also massively toned down the camouflage patterns. As I said during the Sindine Region DLC segment, I was getting really tired of doing camo patterns, so this is one of the last ones I've done. Lagavert, the Invisible Rabbit Pokemon. The evolved form of Rabaflosh, I based this off of the Invisible Man, primarily the classic Universal Studios design, with the bandages and the sunglasses, which is why I wrapped the ears around the face and I made the eyes black. The torso with the fur placement is supposed to resemble the robe he wore in the movie as part of the iconic design. The biggest change to this Pokemon was replacing the ice that was covering the body with the fur that is on there now, making it look more natural and less tacked on overall. This is a pretty good Route 1 Pokemon in my eyes. Hellworm, the Insecure Pokemon. This entire line is based on Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th series, with this stage representing his time as a child at Camp Crystal Lake. This changed very little from the original, mainly just making the leaves bigger and having the body crawling around the ground instead of just lying flat. This is one of my favorite Route 1 bugs, each stage just getting better and better. Saku, the Burlap Pokemon. This is based on Jason's design from Friday Part 2 when he wore the burlap sack around his head. This changed the least out of the entire line, mainly just making the lower body bigger and making the rope around the torso more pronounced and slightly making these visible eye bigger. I also changed the bottom of this Pokemon's body shape to have a more unique silhouette and to help resemble the mask / hood Jason wore. I think this is a very clever Cocoon Pokemon. Manchetus, the Stalker Pokemon. This changed the most out of the entire line, mainly in the form of gains. This Pokemon bulked up big time in the reboot, now resembling Jason in most of his appearances. Outside of the much larger upper body, I changed the patterns on the machete hands so they felt more like they were covered in blood, and I made the pants more splayed out at the end to break up the shape of the leg. Overall, this is one of the best Pokemon in the entire region. Voltini, the Angry Chirp Pokemon. In contention for changing the least in the reboot, this Pokemon is based on Vulture Chicks. The only changes really were making the head bigger and having the entire eye be yellow as opposed to just the pupil. I think this thing's personality is represented pretty well, even if there isn't much of a secondary concept for the majority of this line. Voltemper, the uppity Aven Pokemon. Like its Prevo, this Pokemon didn't change much in the second pass. I mainly added teeth to the mouth to feel more vicious and to help transition to the final evolution better. I slightly fixed the hair on its head and added more definitions to the feathers on its wings. I also slightly lightened the shade of gray used for the main body. Voltyrant, the Scavenger King Pokemon. Slap a Dragon's Fang on Voltemper and get it to level 30 and you have this monster on your team. I based this off of the infamous B movie, The Giant Claw. Now this got an upgrade. The basic design is still there, but I changed the pose, the proportions, and the color scheme. Albeit slightly on that last one. I made the neck longer to help it stand out more against the rest of the line. I added more teeth and added the 2 spikes on his neck to really help sell the dragon type more. I moved the wings back so it felt more natural and shrank the legs so they felt less out of place with their original pose. I made the fur/feathers around the neck bigger and added them around the hands for color balance. This is one of the best redesigns in the reboot. Strefigi, the Straw Doll Pokemon. Another Pokemon in contention for changing the least. This Pokemon is based on straw dolls and effigies. Most of the changes came from the proportion alterations and making the texture a little bit more subtle, trying to make the design feel less cluttered, as simple as it is. I also made the blue of the eyes and mouth more saturated to stand out against the tan of the body. Wicember, the effigy Pokemon. Give your Strefigi a Firestone and you have this Pokemon. Based on the Pokemon The Wicker Man, the original or the remake, take your pick. I made the rope more pronounced in the redesign, helping break up the silhouette and body shapes more. I also changed the colors of the fingers and the stomach cage to a darker brown to stand out more against the rest of the body. I made the burlap/hay texture more subtle across the board, and this Pokemon was finished. It's a solid design overall. Denhaka, the Wiretap Pokemon. The Pika clone of the region, this little fella is based on Shrews and Ghostface from the Scream franchise. This changed a bit from the original, but it's still more or less the same. I added more fur to the arms so it looked like the frayed edges of Ghostface's cloak. I added the white underbelly for color balanced, and I upped the saturation on the yellow, as well as changing the shape of the end of the tail to look like an old TV antenna. I love this little goober. This is probably my favorite Pika clone. Anagorge, the Starving Snake Pokemon. This and the evolution are based on the movie Anaconda and other giant snake movies across the board. Overall, in terms of changes, I mainly simplified the mouth and changed some of the perspectives on the pattern along the back. I also went with a brighter shade of green to stand out more. Not much more to say here. Moving on. Glutaconda, the Gorging Pokemon. Now this got an overhaul. The basic concept is still the same. An overstuffed and gluttonous anaconda. I simplified the hell out of this design. I removed the pattern on the back and the face pattern I had on the stomach. I also made the quote-unquote bib around the neck bigger to help compensate for that fact. The overstuffed cheeks got larger, now covering up part of the eye, and the tongue went from a normal fork to a prong to stab meat. The tail still acts like a spoon and a catapult to throw their prey into the air so they can grab it. I really messed with the perspective on the body, since the original was fairly basic, but I'm glad this one really helped fix that. I love this design. Oh, fun fact, their favorite food is Grookey. Telepressed, the Sheltered Pokemon. This got a substantial upgrade. The entire line is based on the movie Carrie. Well, the movie and the book. Each stage represents one part of her journey in the movie, this being when she was isolated with her mother. I increased the amount of hair this Pokemon has so it became the bulk of the design so she could hide in it as needed. I swapped out the dull gray of her dress with the purples we have now to stand out against the blue hair. I wanted her to look like she was in the fetal position mid-air with her knees in front of her face. Carrie, the accepted Pokemon. This changed the least out of the line, with most of the changes being minor in comparison. This is based on Carrie at the beginning of prom before shit went down. I added more purple to the design, such as the sash and the tips of her fingers. I made her hair a little bit more curved with the front two strands for some diversity in the shapes. The white of the dress is supposed to resemble her prom dress, along with her little crown up front. Esperath, the vengeful Pokemon. Give your Carrie a Duskstone and this telekinetic storm of anger is born. This changed the most out of all the stages of this line. This representing Carrie after going insane once the blood is dropped on her during prom. I replaced the white with black to help show off the dark type and her descent into madness. I made the blood red of her dress stand out against the rest of the red in her hair and face. I spread her hair out to look more intimidating and creepy, kind of like an angry witch. But the biggest change was the telekinetic blood hands on either side of her that used to be part of the hair in the first draft of the design. I gave the purple glow around it to show it being held together with her immense psychic abilities. This is one of my favorite redesigns in the entire reboot. Vanician Snowmite, the snowball Pokemon. This didn't change much from its original counterpart, just adding in the elements I gave to the Texkin reboot design. Mainly the little snowball on top. This line is based on the Jack Frost movies. No, not the Michael Keaton one, the one with the killer snowman. I made the edges rougher to contrast with normal Snowmite, added the purple to reference the ghost type easier, even though it also could have been poison and no one would know the difference just from looking at it, admittingly. Sub-Zero is an ability I actually created in my Greece region that I did just before the Vanic reboot. So I brought it back here. Vanician Snowapede, the Snow Gang Pokemon. Evolves from Vanician Snowmite when leveled up holding the purple scarf. This design got a damn near total overhaul in the reboot. This is based off of Jack and his snowball minions from the second movie. The segments of the rebooted Snowapede now fly around in formation behind the main body, each one housing an evil soul that died in the cold. The hat and the crystals on the filler segments of the body are made from black ice to help sell the top hat look, but also to break up the colors. I made the bright blue more saturated to stand out against the rest of the color scheme. This is a pretty good evolution in my eyes. Vanician Snowtar, the snowman Pokemon. Evolves from Vanician Snowmite when leveling up holding the orange scarf. This is not an overt reference to movies, but more of a concept building off of them. This newly introduced Pokemon to the reboot is the combined sense of justice from all of the victims of Snowmite and Snowapede in the Vanik region. I wanted this Pokemon to feel strong, like a classic hero versus the villain that Snowapede is. I moved the face to the chest to differentiate it from its Vanician counterpart, the teeth here are acting like a belt. Overall, I think this has a great sense of contrast with its split evolution counterpart. Kramkid, the naughty Pokemon. This and its evolution are based off of Krampus. I mainly changed the pose with this Pokemon, making it feel more dynamic with some minor proportion changes. This would be the Sneasel of the region if this were an actual game. My favorite detail is still the switch in its hand that it uses to hit people with. Cramfiend, the naughty Pokemon. This got a decent amount of changes in the reboot. I extended the fur on the head to give it more of a proper Santa hat, helping further separate the head and body. I moved the arms down to a position that actually makes some anatomical sense, and I changed the colors to emphasize the icy portions of the body. I love this Pokemon. I really need to give Delibird an evolution to be a rival to this Pokemon line. Scorminer, the Tunnel Digger Pokemon. Based on Harry Warden from My Bloody Valentine and Scorpions, the base design of this Pokemon is more or less the same, but I moved some elements around and changed one thing massively. I gave this thing a more defined mouth on top of the gas mask design of the face, and made the hard hat section of the head less tacked on and feel more like a part of its actual body. It used to have a pickaxe for a stinger, but I moved that down to the legs and replaced it with a drill at someone's suggestion on Discord when I was redesigning this thing. I feel like with a few tweaks, this could actually be an official Pokemon. Vanician Impidimp, the Cave Stalker Pokemon. This entire line is based on the cave dwellers from the Descent series. Originally, this was a rock dark type, but I made it a rock sound type to better fit in with the blindness these regional variants experience. The design barely changed here, just adding more details and textures to the rocks covering the body. Honestly, that's pretty much the same for the rest of this line as well. Vanician Morgrim, the Devious Pokemon. I added the darker gray to stand out against the earthy brown of the hair on this Pokemon. Said hair has completely covered the eyes, hammering in these things navigate by sounds now. I made the end of the tail into a spearhead so they can defend themselves. Other than that, everything I said about Impidimp applies here. Vanician Grimmsnarl, the Stone Body Pokemon. This changed a bit more than the others, mainly in the shape of the hips and the spikes coming around from behind its back. Other than that, same basic thing as I've been saying. I do love this Pokemon despite not having a whole lot to say about it. It made my in-game team, that has to say something. Hortigon, the Cave Pokemon. The first new cross-gen evolution added to the reboot, this behemoth is the evolved form of Druddigon, based on cave-dwelling dragons and other dragon movies. I wanted this Pokemon to feel more armored, tanky, and dangerous than Druddigon. This thing is slow, but it hits like an absolute truck. I added the mace/flail at the end of the tail to function as the main weapon in battle, and to have as the centerpiece of the design. This is one of my favorite cross-gen evolutions of the entire region, easily. Zombole, the Rising Dead Pokemon. This didn't change too much in the reboot. The biggest change was adding the dirt covering the claws so they didn't get lost in the dirt surrounding the body. I also made the eyes green for color balance. Outside of better line work and textures, that's pretty much it in terms of changes. Crowley, the Swamp Ape Pokemon. This handsome lad is based on Victor Crowley from the Hatchet series. A moderate change from the original, the biggest update was to the pose. I made the current one as dynamic as I could, versus the original one, which was just standing around looking grumpy. I gave it a more defined head and face, complete with scar for some color. I fixed the leg proportions and the positioning, and generally just added a better render on the fur. This was a solid update. Glidelin, a Hijack Pokemon. The version-exclusive counterpart to Crowley, this Pokemon is based on the Gremlin from the Twilight Zone. I added this Pokemon to the reboot to add more flying types to my Pokedex. I wanted it to look like it was wearing a paragliding suit with the patterns along the body and with the general shape of the wings. I like this Pokemon, but I don't love it. That being said, I am glad I added it to the region. Vanician Marshtomp, the Lagoonfish Pokemon. This and the original Swampert are based on the gill man from the Creature of the Black Lagoon. Minor proportion changes are the name of the game with this redesign, mainly in the head and face. I made the colors more saturated since they were way too muted in the original design. I'm pretty happy with the design here now. Vanician Swampert, the Lagoonfish Pokemon. Outside of brighter colors, slightly changing the shape of the fingertips, and an overall better render, this didn't change much between versions. I can say the shinies got a major buff in the reboot. Originally, they were just the colors of regular Swampert, but I changed them since it wasn't interesting enough here. Yanura, the Buzzing Dragon Pokemon. Slap a Dragon's Fang on Yanmega and you have this buzzing beast. This got a substantial redesign going into the reboot. This is based on ancient dragonflies and Megaguirus from Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. Originally, this had an alternating pattern on the body, but it got too busy very quickly, so I simplified the design here. I had the purple take over as the main body color, with the green from Yanmega now being used as an accent alongside the underbelly. I had the stinger coming forward in the new pose versus hanging back like in the original. I toned down the number of red spikes on the body, but I made most of them bigger to compensate. This is still one of my favorite cross-gen evolutions in this region. Vengord, the Vengeance Pokemon. This Pokemon is based on Jack-o'-lanterns and Pumpkinhead from said titular movie series. I made this Pokemon a lot more 3D in the redesign, giving it a more defined body and proportions. Added more leaves to the bottom of the body to help bridge between the pumpkin and the vine legs. I love this Pokemon shiny. It is so good. Crush, the Vengeance Pokemon. I made the head bigger to resemble its reference material more and to help the silhouette stand out a tad more. I made the chest and crotch pieces resemble a face more as a pseudo jack-o'-lantern, with the chest pattern being the eyes. I made the tail black for color balance with the green dots to add some detailing, and added a spike at the end to attack with. Let's see. I made the feet more proportioned and added the brown to the toes and the fingers so they didn't get lost with the rest of the color scheme. Overall, I really love this Pokemon. This is one of my best. Retribution was a fun ability. I might add that to more Pokemon going forward. Mousestrode, the Survivor Pokemon. A missed opportunity in the original region. I added this line to represent famous final girls across the years. This stage is based on Laurie Strode from the Halloween series before her confrontation with Michael. This Pokemon is innocent and happy, ignorant of the horrors around it waiting to strike. I designed the colors to resemble her original outfit in the first Halloween movie. I chose a mouse as the basis for the design because of their role traditionally as a prey animal. I thought that would be fitting thematically. Rodesti, the Survivor Pokemon. Based on Sally Hardesty from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this stage is based on the final girl becoming a victim initially at the hand of their monster or slasher, terrified at the world before gaining the courage to fight back and take back their strength. The blood pattern is a reference to how Sally looked at the end of the movie, escaping on the back of the truck covered in blood. I made the hair wavy to resemble the actress more, and to differentiate the shapes between evolution stages. This I probably could have done more, but I still do really like this Pokemon. Valor Ripley, the Survivor Pokemon. Give your Rodesti a combat stone and you'll have this Pokemon on your team. Based on Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise, specifically aliens in this case. The ends of their tails are now a weapon for this Pokemon to fight back against their tormentors. They've gotten stronger and are no longer afraid to confront the darkness, hence the fighting type. This took a few tries to get down, mainly making the harness pattern look natural and not tacked on. The blood that once covered this Pokemon is now war paint on their faces. This is honestly one of my favorite additions to the region. If I could have more than 6 Pokemon, this would have made my team. Kujab, the Scrappy Pup Pokemon. Based on St. Bernard's martial artists and the movie Cujo, this Pokemon got some much-needed upgrades in the reboot. The original was essentially just a dog drawn in the Pokemon style. Now I've leaned more into the karate aspect and added the belt around the waist to break up the colors and look more like a traditional karate gi. The bandages on the nose and limb help add some color and cement the theming of the line. I squared off the end of the tail to make it look thicker and less like a normal dog. Kujudo, the Powerhouse Pokemon. The biggest change to the design outside of minor proportion changes were the addition of black and red to the color scheme. I made the Pokemon look more unhinged to lean into the rabies aspect of Cujo. I probably should have given this Pokemon Blight as its hidden ability so it had Poison Stab. But oh well. Other than that, I wouldn't change a thing about the redesign of this good boy. Crabelle, the Bell Shell Pokemon. I added this Pokemon to have more sound types in the region and to make Hunchbell, its evolution, a 2-stage line. This Pokemon is based on the Hunchback of Notre Dame and Hermit Crabs. I made the shell here a rusty cowbell so the difference between stages be more pronounced, and it contrasts well against the blue of the body. I don't have a whole lot to say about this Pokemon, I just think it's cute. Hunchbell, the Ringing Crab Pokemon. Once given a Harmony Stone, your Crabell will evolve into Hunchbell. The original version of this Pokemon was terrible. Arguably worse than Raboflage. This Pokemon failed on every level except conceptually. Thankfully, the redesign fixes every issue I had with it. I made this Pokemon more visible underneath its shell. I purposely made it ugly to reference Quasimodo's deformities. I made the bell gold to help stand out against the colors, and brought over the rust color from the first stage as an accent to contrast against the greenish blue and the bright gold of the shell. This was a much needed redesign and evolution. Also, if you can read Unknown, this has a little message for you if you read the inscribing on the bell. Comurta, the Toxic Terror Pokemon. This is based on the horror movie Komodo and other killer lizard/dinosaur movies. As for the alterations, I shrank the body, made the head and feet bigger with more pronounced claws. I shrank the tail and made the underbelly darker. Honestly, not much to say about this Pokemon. The evolution, on the other hand, Kofanto, the Toxic Soul Pokemon. Evolves from Comurta once it learns its signature move, Spectral Slash. Now, this is an interesting case in regard to the reboot. Originally, this was a poison dragon type called Kodraco, and I hated it. Looking back on it now, it was so boring in comparison to the other mons of the region, I had to change it. So I swapped the dragon type with ghosts, and the rest was history. I shrank the arms and I added the gradient to the arms and legs so it had a bit more of an interesting color scheme. I added the ectoplasm spikes on the head and the tail scythe, and maintained the orange for the pattern on the body. This is one of the best redesigns in the reboot. Honestly, I just love Poison Ghost. I'm glad they finally added another one with Pecharunt. Grymoose, the Space Bacteria Pokemon. The first Convergent line of the region. This entire line is based on the Blob. Originally, this was a regional variant, but I wanted some diversity in the region, so I swapped it out. Not much changed in between versions. I mainly made the asteroid on its back more 3D. I made the eyes and the tongue more vibrant, and I added the slime texture across the board. Not much more to say here. Slimemuck, the Space Bacteria Pokemon. Second verse, same as the first. Everything applied to Grymoose applies here as well. I did give it a slightly more defined chin here. Normally, I would feel this is underwhelming for a Convergent line. Thankfully, we're not done just quite yet. Bulb, the Consuming Mass Pokemon. Evolves from Slimemuck when traded for a Texkinian Muck. I added this Pokemon to the region since in the first draft, only Texkinian Muck as part of the trade, so I had to rectify that here. I took a page out of the Blob that ate everything from Goosebumps for the tongue, having it be the focal point of the design. The gradient on the body took a long time to get right, but I'm glad I did. The asteroid pieces now serve as armor along the body. Consumption was a fun ability I try not to give out too often, only having it on this and Glutaconda. Tar, the Oil Fire Pokemon. Evolves from Texkinian Muck when traded for a Slimemuck. This is based on the Tarman from Return of the Living Dead. I massively simplified the body of this Pokemon. I gave it more defined arms and shoulders, and I separated the leg slime for an easier silhouette. I added the orange to act as a transition from the oil to the fire. This is so much better than the original version that it's scary. Abominatefin, the mutant fish Pokemon. Based on Womul, I hope I'm pronouncing that, the mutant monster from the Korean film The Host. I wanted this Pokemon to be super simple compared to its evolution, so it has a very minimalist design. Enough details to get the point across. Fun fact, the lower jaw can actually split in two, hence the line down the middle. I don't have a lot to say about this mutant fish derp. It's a pretty good addition, and I think it's cute in an ugly way. Maltation, the mutant fish Pokemon. Evolves from Abominate Fin once exposed to a sludge stone. This mutant monstrosity took more than a few times to nail down. I wanted to get as many details from the movie monster as I could. I referenced the fish merged with its body with the shape of the main fin. I really love the color scheme with this Pokemon. The gross green and the vibrant purple really sell the toxic nature of this giant freak. There isn't a thing I'd change about this Pokemon. Trimworm, the sandworm Pokemon. Based on the Graboids from the Trimmer series, this Pokemon didn't change too much from its original design. I swapped the color on the top of its head to be more sandy, to tie into the patch of sand it's bursting out of. I changed the mouths on the tongues to be more readable at a glance, and I changed the back spikes to black for color balance. Solid update, nothing more to add here. Shriekoon, the walking husk Pokemon. Based on the second phase of the Graboid life cycle, the Shrieker, this walking cocoon actually got some sizable changes. I gave it a more defined head and back, and I made the face and the claws black for color balancing, and I made the red more saturated here to stand out. I simplified the face so it looked like one combined shell versus having an actual fully functioning mouth here. I fixed the perspective on the legs so they actually felt more powerful and three-dimensional here. Blastsex, the rocket glider Pokemon. Based on the final stage in the life cycle, the Acid Blaster, this changed the most out of every stage in the line. I changed the pose so it felt more dynamic, like it was about to lift off. I overhauled the fins and the red sections to stand out more. I also gave it a clear separation of the neck and body. Overall, this is a great update. Imhotort, the ancient shell Pokemon. One of my favorite lines in both versions of the region. This tiny fella got some minor but meaningful changes. Fixed the proportions so they felt more in line with the first stage Pokemon, and I made the toes more pronounced. I upped the saturation on the colors, mainly the gold, so it felt more impressive and regal. This line is based off of the Mummy, mainly the Boris Karloff version. Torfero, the Tomb Turtle Pokemon. Evolves once it hits level 25 holding a King's Rock. This Pokemon got a huge upgrade in the reboot. I fixed the perspective of the pyramid on its back so it actually matched more up with the angle this Pokemon is facing. I swapped some color rounds, mainly the blue and gold here and there. I beefed up the front legs so they felt more powerful and it was actually able to hold itself up now. I made the headdress more dynamic and regal, and I simplified the bandages across the body. Lastly, I added the diamonds to the pyramid and the chin to add an element of treasure and that much needed splash of color. I love this Pokemon so much. Harclaw, the listening Pokemon. I added this Pokemon to the reboot to help fill out the sound-type Pokemon, and naturally, the Death Angels from A Quiet Place fit the bill perfectly. This is, admittingly, just a Death Angel drawn in a Pokemon style without much of a secondary concept behind it. I'll be the first to say it. In my defense, this design came out flamed, so I'm willing to overlook it. The head took me the longest time to get right, but it was more than worth the hassle. I also remember the arms giving me some issues at the time, but they came out well enough. Cryteeth, the Rabid Pack Pokemon. Another Pokemon added to the reboot to add more ground types. These menaces are based on the Kryte from the Critters series, and acts as the second wishy-washy mon of the region. I went with a duo for this base form since these things hunt in packs, and it would just be boring just to have a single Kryte as the base design. The Kryte Ball form is where the design pops off. I modeled it after the accurately named Kryte Ball from Critters 2. I wanted this thing to feel like a giant furry Pac-Man coming to eat you. This is one of my favorite additions to the reboot. Torundra, the Axe-tail Pokemon. So, I based this mon off of Jack Torrance from The Shining, since this is one of the harder ones to tell at a glance. I made an Ice type to reference the snowy isolation of the Overlook Hotel, and a Steel type because Jack was trying to kill his family with an axe. Hence the tail. This didn't change a whole lot. I mainly just shrank the legs and thickened them up more. I also made the axe bigger at the end of the tail. I don't know if I'll ever give this Pokemon an evolution. Food for thought. Vanician Squirtle, the tiny turtle Pokemon. This entire line is based off of Gamera from the franchise of the same name. I made it a fairy type because of Gamera's nature of defending children and overall as being nicer than most kaiju. Almost all the changes here were done to the color scheme as I completely flipped the script on him. The original was a muted pink with blue accents, so I swapped them around and replaced the pink with magenta for contrast. Fun fact, the shinies of this line were basically the original color schemes for the first draft of this line, with the exception of the final stage. Vanician Wartortle, the turtle Pokemon. This has slightly more changes than just the color scheme switch. I moved the arms to a different pose so it wasn't a complete carbon copy of the original Wartortles. I slightly changed the expression, now it's looking off to the side, and I changed the end of the tail to line up more with Gamera's. Not many changes, but they add up. Gamma Boost, the Child Guardian Pokemon. Originally, this was a regional Blastoise in the first draft of the region, but I decided I wanted to go with Gamera's flying form for the evolution in the reboot. I decided to make it a regional evolution after a lengthy discussion on Discord. I removed the arms and legs from the original design and replaced them with the long fin/wings in the front and the jet boosters in the back. The cannons on the back can be used as a nitro boost when in battle or just in the wild. I feel this thing looks a tad too much like Blastoise in hindsight, but I still do love my Pokemon. This is part of my in-game team. Amaze, the Shulk Pokemon. Finally meeting the Pokemon I alluded to in the land of Albafay from the last video. This tiny guy is just based on corn cobs. The trick with this Pokemon comes down to its many split evolutions. I made the main body bigger, I shrank down the Shulk acting as the arms and legs, and added the tuft of hair at the top for a more interesting silhouette. Not the most interesting Pokemon, but the evolutions make up for it. Minefield, the root system Pokemon. Evolves from Amaze once it levels up holding a twisted spoon. This is loosely based on the entity from Children of the Corn. This got a fair number of changes going into the reboot. I thickened up the main body so it could support its head bigger. I added the dirt at the bottom to break up the colors and cement this Pokemon to the ground. I replaced the two vines on its back for a full-fledged evil villain cape, and generally added more pink stems across the body. I also changed the pose a tad so it was more dynamic. Boundless Mind was an ability from a later region, because I forgot Psychic Surge existed, so that was fun. Leprechaun, the Gold Kernel Pokemon. Evolves from Amaze once it levels up holding a gold nugget. This is based on the Leprechaun series. This Pokemon didn't change as much as Minefield, but the changes were necessary. I made this Pokemon more overtly mischievous, with the look of it giving somebody a raspberry. I made the gold nugget beard bigger and added the texture to help separate it from the corn cob body bigger. I have the Shulk cloak coat covering more of the body now. Overall, this is my favorite of the three possible evolutions, with Corncussion coming in as a close second. Cordyceps, the infected Pokemon. So let it be known, I'm not a huge fan of The Last of Us, but I can't even deny its impact culturally, so I had to make use of that. I wanted more ghost types, and this was just the ticket. This Pokemon took a few tries to get the fine details down. I chose deer for the animal basis because of a condition called chronic wasting disease. I don't want to get into it too much, look it up and see for yourself. I tried to get as much of the Clicker's design elements in this Pokemon, and it turned out great. The mushroom horns and the deer skull pattern on the face sell it for me. Infectious Cloud was an ability to reference how infectious Cordyceps were in the game. Blotelk, the infected Pokemon. Evolves from Cordyceps once it used a spore 10 times in battle. I just had to. It was too tempting not to make that the evolution method. This thing is based on the bloaters from the series, and it took more than a few tries to nail down the proportions. I initially had the legs smaller, so this thing would be a proper chonker, but I was convinced to give it the current legs, and they were right. This Pokemon is just on the cusp of being too busy, but I still feel it worked out fantastically. The mushroom growths across the body and the giant horns really paint the picture I wanted it to. Said horns were a pain to get right. Malaya Ground with the turkey Pokemon. This was a suggestion added the region that I was initially against, but I relented and added to this Pokemon, based on Turkey from... Thanks, Killing. I kept the face as I could to the cheap puppet, but I gave him more of an ovalish body shape so it felt more Pokemon. 3 guesses to what the pattern on the wings and tails represent. Yeah, you got it right. Premeditate was a fun ability. I really gotta stop putting on actual dark-type Pokemon so it feels more impactful. Anyway, Spydrome, the grunt Pokemon. This entire line is based on the social structures of the spiders from the movie Arachnophobia, these being the soldier class. Another Pokemon that desperately needed the upgrade. This Pokemon benefited more than most in the reboot. The basic concept is still the same, but I changed almost every proportion from the original design. I shrank the legs and body so it was close to something like Spinarak. I made the old school army helmet more apparent here and made the eyes more vibrant and striking. The original design sucked, so thankfully this remedies that mistake. Commandnid, the general Pokemon. The evolved form of male Spydrome, this is based on the general spider from the end of the movie. This got a huge change as well. More so than with Spydrome. I condensed the upper and lower body into one, shrank the arms massively, and added the metal decorations on the shoulders to look like shoulder straps on military uniforms. The biggest change was in the abdomen now looking like a grenade to play into the steel typing and the army theming. I had to give it the now nerfed TNT ability once I made that decision. Monarachnid, the Toxic Queen Pokemon. The evolved form of female Spydrome, this is based on the Queen Spider from the movie. This changed the least overall out of the line, mainly swapping out the abdomen and making the legs much bigger. I added some fur all around the body to help it look more regal and also further emphasize the crown on her head. I made it look like she was wearing a royal dress versus the normal spider abdomen of the original design. The color layout on this redesign took a few tries to get right. Carnifang, the mean green Pokemon. A long overdue evolution for Carnifang once it levels up holding a Dragon's Fang. This Pokemon is based on Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. This is one of the bigger upgrades in the region, and it was needed since the original kinda sucked. I shrank the head and made the vines thicker overall so this thing had more support. I made the leaf wings smaller but wider to create a more impressive silhouette, and added the red to pop against the green for contrast. I simplified or flat out removed some of the patterns on the body so it was less cluttered. I made the pot around the stomach more 3D so it looked less pasted on. This is my favorite cross-gen evolution of the region. Possibly rivaled by Yon-Era. Dragon's Song was added since I wanted this thing to still have a tie to sound type attacks considering the source material, but I didn't want to give it the same abilities as some of the other sound types. This was an easy lock-in for my team despite having another grass type already. UFO, the unidentified Pokemon. Evolved from Behem, once exposed to a Sky Stone, this Pokemon is based on UFOs, ray guns, and the Martians from Mars Attacks. The biggest change to this Pokemon in the reboot was the pose. I went with an underview shot, so the pose was more dynamic, like it was about to shoot someone with the tip from its lower body. I added the dark blue for the main body since the gray of the original was too boring. I made the green skin more saturated as well to compensate for this fact. The scarf, the original Pokemon, has become a fully fledged cape to give this Pokemon some bulk. Much needed upgrade overall. Vanikian Liepard, the cruel Pokemon. This regional form is based on the shape himself, Michael Myers from the Halloween series. The changes with this Pokemon are more subtle but effective, mainly in the face. I made the eyes completely black to resemble Michael's masks more and sell the cold nature of the Pokemon better. I gave it more of a collar to break up the silhouette. and I bulked up the tail so the knife at the end was better supported. I also removed some of the patterns on the face so it was less cluttered. A solid update. Fun fact, this is one of the main predators for the Mousestrode line. Wax-a-Whale, the Candle Tomb Pokemon. Loosely based on the House of Wax, this Pokemon is probably one of the weaker additions to the reboot, but I still have a soft spot for it. I love the render on this the most. I think I really got the melting wax feel down pretty well. The splash of gold with the lower body really helps bring the design together. Wax on is a fun little ability to help this mon stand out even a little bit more than it probably deserves to, honestly. Vanic, the Steak Tusk Pokemon. Proportion changes were the biggest thing going into the reboot with this Van Helsing-based line. I made the head and body less separated here since it looked awkward on the original version. I moved the legs into a more stable position and I made the ears a little bit bigger. Fun fact, the pattern on the side of the body is supposed to resemble globes of Karlik because it fights vampires. It's funny. Helseer, the Steak Tusk Pokemon. I changed the position slightly with this Pokemon so it wasn't just standing there doing nothing. I made it slightly more hunched over as I increased the size of the top portion of the jacket. I shrank the legs so this thing felt more bulky like Embor, which I imagine they're probably distantly related to. The tusks are supposed to resemble steaks. Duh. Outside of just better rendering on the fire, not much else changed. This thing is the arch enemy of Dracoid. Jet-Type, the Wind-Up Pokemon. This little guy is based on Wind-Up toys and Jet Jaguar from Godzilla Singular Point. I went with the blockier, thicker design of the character from Singular Point for this stage to better resemble the old Wind-Up toys. The perspective across the board took me a long time to get right, making sure they are all facing the same direction more or less. The only thing I changed now is to fix the back arm since it looks janky. Otherwise, this was a great addition to the reboot. Jaguarior, the Mecha Pokemon. Evolves via exposure to a combat stone. This Pokemon resembles Jet Jaguar from Godzilla vs. Megalon now that it can move around more and perform complex combat maneuvers. This is the easier of the two to design since Jet Jaguar's original appearance is fairly simple, all things considered. The blue sections around the body took the longest time to get right with the design outside of the render. I almost wish I put this Pokemon on my in-game team. Pyrodan, the Volcano Chick Pokemon. Obviously based on Rodan, though this stage is more based off of the classic design from the first movie he was in. Not much changed here. I brought the head down from its original awkward angle that it had previously, and I made the wings and eggshell slightly bigger and simplified the color scheme a tad. I also gave it a clear personality and expression. This is a solid Fakemon. Magmavian, the Lava Wing Pokemon. Now this changed a lot from the original version, being based off of Rodan from Godzilla King of the Monsters. I gave it a simpler pose to really show off the magma wings. Off topic, this is where I think I finally got good at rendering magma. I changed the head so the beak felt more distinctive and the crest/horns took up more space and went further back alongside the back of the head. I shrank the legs so the wings were the main draw of the design, and I cut down the amount of molten rock stuck in the lava. One of the best glow-ups in the region. Vanician Masharna, the Dreamstalker Pokemon. This regional variant evolves from Mona once exposed to a Firestone and is based on Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street series. First major change was I removed the brown from the original draft and replaced it with the black of the current design. I toned down on the sweater pattern on the body to just the upper torso and a little bit of the feet. I made the hat more apparent and with a slightly more distinct expression. I made the psychic arm more flame-like, both in color and shape. I also added the burn pattern underneath the eye to top it all off. This is now a very, very good regional variant in my eyes. Krakoko, the Coconut Pokemon. If you're brave enough to give your Octococo a water stone, this behemoth is your reward. Based on the Kraken and other giant octopi movies, honestly, the biggest change to this one was just making the colors more saturated. I did not need to really change this Pokemon outside of just giving it better art in general. I still love that the coconuts at the end of this tentacles can be used like flails. This was a great cross-gen evolution for one of my own mons. Hell, this might be the first cross-gen evolution for one of my mons. I'll have to double-check that. Submara, the Video Stalker Pokemon. Based on Samara/Sadako from the Ring series, this scary little lady only got minor changes in the reboot. I made the film strip legs shorter but thicker, along with generally better perspective on them. I made the hair slightly shorter so you could see more of her main body. I also made her tape hair clips more 3D. That's still my favorite little detail on the design. And I generally just simplify the main body a smidge. This is one of the more creative Pokemon in the region, and I'm really happy with how the reboot design came out. Zegra, the Sea Sword Pokemon. Another Pokemon added to the reboot. This is based on Zegra from both Gamera vs. Zegra and Gamera Rebirth. I took elements from both designs and added a bit more of a manta ray element in there to help flesh it out. I made it a water flying type to reference Zegra's ability to both swim and fly, and I needed more flying types in the Pokedex. I was tempted to give it sharpness, but I was overusing the ability at this point, so I gave it steel worker to compensate. The head was the hardest part to design. It took more than a few tries to get the perspective right. If you like this kind of Pokemon, I'll be adding more Gamera Kaiju in the DLC down the line, so look forward to that when I eventually get to it. B-Charge, the Sand Burrower Pokemon. Yet another Pokemon added in the reboot. I based this off of the giant jellyfish thing from the movie The Sand. Now, this was actually relatively easy to design. I had the basic idea in my head the moment I decided to add it to the region, so I could put in a few more ground types in the Pokedex. I wanted this Pokemon to be very simplistic, but carried by the render to give it that bioluminescent feel that the reference material does. I don't know if I'll ever give this thing an evolution that shows more of the body underneath. Some things need to stay a mystery, like Diglett. Vanician Tentacool, the jellyfish Pokemon. This line is based off of the tripods from War of the Worlds, with this stage being primarily designed off of the original draft. Very little change with this Pokemon, just better line work and rendering. Nothing really needed to change, so I'm glad the base design spoke for itself. I did up the saturation of the main blue of the body so the other colors stood out more. Vanician Tentacruel, the jellyfish Pokemon. This is based on the tripods from the 2005 movie. I cut down on the number of smaller tentacles underneath the body, and I made the central ones more robotic looking to help sell it as a steel type and to give it more of an alien vibe. I made the orbs on their heads more like the spotlights on the source material and stand out when compared to the ones on normal Tentacruel. Fun fact, the shinies to this line were originally the OG Kanto colors, but I changed it to be more unique and less predictable. Cataclysm, the villain Pokemon. Another cross-gen evolution added to the reboot. This is the evolved form of Crawdons when exposed to a Duskstone. This is based on Ebera from its debut movie, Ebera, Horror of the Deep. Now, this one took a long time to get right. I went through draft after draft until I nailed down this design. The face was the hardest part to design around, but I actually love the expression here. The legs also took more than a few tries to get right. Colors weren't as difficult, except for the tail, which took a minute to get balanced. Crawdons needed the evolution, so I'm glad I added it here, and as well as added it to my team. Misc, the aerial assault Pokemon. Evolves from Sharpedo once exposed to a Sky Stone. This is based on Megalodons, missiles, and the movie Jaws and /or other giant shark movies. This is one of my favorite evolutions from the original region, and this only got better in the reboot. I mainly made the Pokemon thicker, primarily in the front half of the body, and I made the fins and tail more 3D so this thing had a sense of volume, since the original was pretty flat in that regard. I tweaked the color scheme until it was more balanced, and I also added the two tiny fins near the tail to break up the silhouette. A good update for a great Pokemon. Cephaletric, the Thunder Squid Pokemon. This and its evolution are based on the Bride of Frankenstein. Design-wise, I gave the head more surface area since it awkwardly ended at the eyes in the original draft. I made said eyes bigger, added the eyelashes, and made the white tentacles smaller so the arms stood out more. The patterns on the arms were supposed to resemble the bandages on the bride's arms from the original movie. This Pokemon is often a target for Beardaver, who wants to use it as a battery and as a companion. Squidductor, the Thunder Squid Pokemon. Once your Cephaletric is exposed to a combat stone, you have this powerhouse. This didn't change as much of its pre-evolution. I mainly made the metal circles and the end of its tentacles more 3D, so it looked less flat in comparison. The hair is supposed to resemble a Tesla coil like you would see in a mad scientist's lab. Said hair is also slightly bigger, and I added the eyelashes for a little bit of color balancing. This is one of the better Pokemon from the original region, and it stays that way here. Megafowl, the loud honk Pokemon. So to combat my lack of sound types, I added this line into the region. They are based on siren heads and generic birds. I designed this Pokemon to, of course, look like a megaphone, so the transition into a siren felt more natural. Originally, this was going to be a one-stage line, but I added it after the fact since the line felt incomplete. I love the colors on this Mon, as much of a freak show as it is. Siren, the false warning Pokemon. Evolves from Megafowl via Harmony Stone. Now we're full Siren Head with this evolution. The mouth took the longest to get right, and oh my god, it looked so much weirder for the longest time. You have no idea. I gave it the wood texture to blend into the trees at night as they hunt for their preferred prey, Howlays. This was added to complete the predator-prey relationship of the starters with the rest of the region, alongside my lack of sound types, as I mentioned earlier. Feather, the Flying Assault Pokemon. The original wishy-washy mon of the region. This is based off of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Not much change with the base design. I made the tail feathers slightly smaller, the head bigger, and the eyes more expressive, while also adding gray to the underside of the wings for color balancing and just because the original was kind of boring. It's simple but effective. Now the flock form got a huge buff. I changed the pose so it looked like it was beginning to dive bomb their target. I gave it a more defined body with clearer separations. I cut down on the number of glowing eyes across the body, and I changed the shape of the tail just for a change of pace. Now this Pokemon doesn't look awful when it enters battle. Gingegeist, the Phantom Cookie Pokemon, based on the Gary Busey classic, The Ginger Dead Man. Yes, that's real. I also took a page from the Gingerbread Men from the movie Krampus with this Pokemon. Not much changed here outside of just better line work and proportions. I did make the icing on the hands and feet more 3D, so it would break up the shapes a little bit. I had to give it well-baked body as its ability. I could not resist. This and the next Pokemon would be some of the few version exclusives if this were a real game. Dalbala, the Possession Pokemon. Based on Chucky from the Child's Play series, this is the counterpart to Gingegeist. This changed dramatically from the first draft. I shrank the body a lot, mainly in the legs, and I made the hands a lot less defined and more like nubs like you would see with old school dolls. I had the hair take up more space on the head, and I slightly tweaked the eyes here. I added some minor stitching across the body, but the biggest addition were the pins going through the hands to play into the voodoo nature of the Pokemon and the series it's based off of. Voodoo Swap was meant to be annoying to play around if this were an actual game, so this is perfect for Chucky. Vanic and Yamask, the Spirit Pokemon. Based on the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead series, this Pokemon is another contender for changing the least between versions. Hell, it might actually win. The only difference is better line work and perspective. That's it. Now, let's talk about something I can actually go into detail about. Namagrigus, the Forbidden Text Pokemon. Evolves from Vanician Yawmats once exposed to an Ectostone. This was massively simplified in the reboot, the original being an overcluttered mess. I cut down 90% of the sheets of paper that make up this Pokemon's body, and I replaced them with ancient tomes to give this thing more definition to build off of. The render and the perspective of the books was easily the hardest thing to work around. I went back and forth for a long time to get it consistent as it is. I love how this Pokemon came out. A few tweaks, and I feel like this could actually be a real one. B-Trap, the Ecto-Eater Pokemon. When evil ghost types show up, who you gonna call? Sorry, I couldn't resist. This Pokemon is based on the ghost traps from the Ghostbusters series and Beetles. For changes, I made the body slightly longer and I added the wings to break up the colors along the back. I fixed the perspective on the face and horn and made the legs feel more stable. Soul Food was an ability I created in my Africa, primarily Egypt-inspired region, that boosts the defense and special defense of the Pokemon when hit by a ghost-type move instead of taking damage. I really do love the colors on this line. The orange really pops whenever it shows up. Protag, the Ectostream Pokemon. Evolves when exposed to a Hive Stone, a bug-type evolution stone that I introduced later on. This stage is based on the Proton Pack from the Ghostbusters series and Stag Beetles. The biggest change for this Pokemon was with the perspective and the positioning of the legs. I added more details to the back and I made the eyes bigger on the face. This was one of my most popular Pokemon in the original region, and it only got better here. My favorite detail are the horn/nozzles for the Proton Packs. Apparit Nun, the Conjured Wrath Pokemon. Another new addition to the region. This is based on Vanic from the Nun/Conjuring. Why did I say it like that? Conjuring series. She was tricky to turn into a fakemon since I've seen another artist do an amazing version of this concept. But I'm really happy with how mine came out. Her nun habit becoming the bulk of the body was one of the things I wanted to do first with this Pokemon to really create a more interesting silhouette to work off of. The arms being a single unit was something I did last minute to seem more like a Pokemon. The color balance took a few tries to get right. She was a really good addition to the region. Phobug, the Night Terror Pokemon. This little shit is based on the Boogeyman. No one particular version this time around. The biggest change to the redesign was making the face bigger and making the eye a brighter orange. Other than that, the rest is a minor pose change to show off more of the body. Not much more to say here. Mogwai, the False Pet Pokemon. Based on the Mogwai from Gremlins, specifically Stripe from the first movie. I made the torso and arms smaller but thicker so it looks more adorable, and I made its mohawk more 3D and fuller looking. Not much else changed, just fixing the proportions was really all this Pokemon needed. Gremlin, the Dismantling Pokemon. Evolves from Mogwai when given a Water Stone at night. This thing is based on Gremlins proper. Now this changed a lot in the redesign, mainly giving it an actual neck of just having, instead of just having the head resting on the body awkwardly. I made the upper body bigger, the legs and the forearms thicker, and I made the pseudo shoulder pads more pronounced so this thing looked physically stronger. I changed the eyes to be pure orange instead of just with the pupils. To top it off, I gave it nails at the end of its claws. A much needed update. Larvillain, the Darkhorn Pokemon. Yet another Godzilla kaiju added to the region. Spoilers for the DLC, expect a lot more of those. This is based on Mothra's counterpart, Batra. This is modeled after their larval form for most of the movie. I made the gold on the head act as a helmet this thing uses as its main weapon, and to simplify the gold accents from the OG kaiju. I made the front legs thicker so this thing had a sense of balance. The colors were the most difficult thing about this Pokemon, going back and forth until they were balanced. It was a nightmare. Batratak, the Violet Moth Pokemon. Now this is based on Batra's more iconic appearance. It's now taken to the skies to do battle. This Pokemon was a bitch to design at every turn, mainly with the legs and the head. Then to top it all off, all the color balancing issues I had with the first stage got worse with the evolution. Despite the monumental headache, this was easily one of the best additions, hands down, to the reboot. Oh my god, I love this Pokemon. Sir Cruel, the fake clown Pokemon. This creepy Pokemon is based on the killer clowns from outer space, and I think I could have done better, honestly. This is one of the last new additions to the reboot, mainly to add another fairy type to help balance out the insane amount of dark types, which this Pokemon didn't help that much, honestly. I leaned into the cotton candy aspect of the clown's mythos and had it be a good portion of their body. The head is supposed to resemble a balloon with a face crudely drawn onto it. I like this mod when I wanted to love it. Vanician Kecleon, the Hidden Hunter Pokemon. Based on the Yaoja from the Predator series, this Pokemon's biggest glow-up came from the texturing. The metal sheen and the scales are really doing the heavy lifting here. I shrank the dreadlocks and the tail, thickening up the latter, and repositioned the legs. I also made the lighter metal section of the face take up less space on the overall head, making it feel more akin to the Predator's mask. This is one of my favorite regional variants in the Vanik region. Hell, it might be my favorite. I'll have to readjust that. If I ever do a tier list, food for thought later. Credleon, the Hidden Hunter Pokemon. This arguably got the second biggest glow-up of the entire region, only outdone by a later entry. Outside of the colors and the basic design elements, I changed everything else about this Pokemon. I made it a quadruped to make it feel more alien and primal. I massively bulked up the upper body of this Pokemon to feel more powerful, to have contrast with the lower body. I altered the head shape to flow better and had the dreadlocks act more like spines here along the back of the head. I simplified the colors along the arms and legs, and I made the tail bigger and visibly segmented, with the yellow spot at the end resembling an eye to scare weaker and or dumber foes. My only wish is that it had more of a 3/4 view, but this is still peak. Cloak and Dagger was created so this Pokemon had a chance despite its terrible defensive typing. This was the final member of my in-game team. Xenomorph, the Hive Serpent Pokemon. The last of the regionals turned Convergents of the Vanik region. This was originally a Vanician Viper line based on the Xenomorphs from the Alien franchise. This changed a good amount in the reboot, mainly with the colors. I made the body darker to resemble the Xenomorphs better and removed some of the green and added them to the spikes along the bottom of the body. I simplified the head to read easier and gave the back of the head more of a curve. I made the tube things on the back thicker and added the purple tips for color balance. This is one of my favorite lines in the entire region. Xenopent, the Acid Monarch Pokemon. God, the original version of this hurts to look at now when I compare it to this one. Based on the Xenomorph Queen, I wanted this Pokemon to feel large and in charge. The biggest addition of the redesign was giving it actual arms instead of it just being a giant snake like the original draft was. I replaced the red in the original design and made it more of a maroon that you see here. And I also gave it the pseudo hood on the side of its neck for a more interesting color balance. I cut out the spikes along the back and just gave it the two central tubes on top of the main arms. I made the head crest more ornate and eye-catching, and lastly, I made the blade at the end of the tail much bigger. This went from one of the worst Pokemon in the Dex to one of the best. Acid Blood is essentially if Poison Point and Corrosion had a baby with a splash of Salt Cure for affecting Steel types more. Tig Arctic, the Ice Fang Pokemon. The next 4 Pokemon are the last additions to the reboot of the region, since the first draft did not have fossil Pokemon. First up, revived from the Saber fossil, this little lad and his evolution are based on Sabertooths and the 2002 movie of the same name. I love this Pokemon so much. There isn't much of a secondary concept that makes it super clever or inspired, just a floofy little kitty who can tear chunks out of you with its fangs. I wanted this Pokemon to be friendlier than it looked at a glance, like all the best Pokemon do. Blizzaber, the Ice Fang Pokemon. I added the white fur along the back to break up the dark blues that dominated the first stage, mainly to help the head stand out when put up against it. I added the purple for contrast against the blues of the rest of the design. The claws and fangs being made of ice probably doesn't make a lick of sense logically, but I love the design and they help it stand out. This is my personal favorite fossil fakemon I've ever done. Mosasaur, the fin blade Pokemon. Revived from the sword fossil, this is based on mosasaurs and loosely Jurassic World. Originally I had a different animal in mind for this slot, but I couldn't get it to look right, so I went back to the drawing board and I chose the mosasaur for my second fossilmon of the region. I generally knew what I wanted it to look like, the low angle giving it the vibe of this thing just drifting in the ocean. I wanted the color scheme to have a great white shark vibe with the dark top and lighter bottom comparatively as a form of camouflage. I don't have much more to say about this stage. Mosasaur, the fin blade Pokemon. This was trickier to design outside of the tail, that is. I knew what I wanted to do there since the name pun popped into my head. I made the yellow more prevalent in design to pop against the other colors better. I added the claws to the ends of the fin to feel more threatening and to sell the dragon type easier. I didn't want this Pokemon to be too busy visually, which is why it doesn't have a lot of detailing on it outside of the pattern along the side. I really do love this Pokemon, but not as much as Blizzaber. Mothsu, the tiny moth Pokemon. We finally reached the pseudo-legendary of the region based on the queen of the monsters herself, Mothra. This stage represents her Showa-era design, which is why she's essentially a flying fluffy plushie. The biggest changes came in the form of perspective alterations, giving it more of a three-quarter view. I made the head slightly smaller here, and I moved the wings back so you could see more of the torso. This is easily the most adorable Pokemon of the region, possibly the most adorable Pokemon I've ever made. Mothileo, the Guardian Moth Pokemon. Moving on to the middle stage, this represents the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy era for the character. I added the blue to reference Mothra Leo, as well as in the name, along with the general shape of the face and color layout. I changed the feet to be more like normal insect legs here since it was too cluttered otherwise. The wings got a lot bigger and squared off at the ends, and I added the blue tips to the antenna for color balance. I also made the thorax bigger to compensate for the wings and have the stinger be slightly more noticeable. Mothroyal, the reincarnation Pokemon. This stage represents the Reiwa era filmed, with this being modeled after her King of the Monsters design and mythology. This has changed the most out of this line. I shrank the body slightly, mostly in the lower body, and got rid of one set of the arms. It was too busy otherwise. I made the stinger and antenna a lot more noticeable, both in size and in color. The biggest addition was the cloud of glittering scales falling off the wings like a rain of stars. This is to reference Mothra's bioluminescence in the movie and how she could produce large waves of light when she wanted to. I transferred that idea into the ability with glitter scale. This is one of my favorite designs of the reboot. All of my hard work really paid off in spades. Zilakwa, the Ocean King Pokemon. The first of the legendary Pokemon. This is based on the Big G himself, Godzilla. Big G here went through a lot of changes in the reboot. All of them much needed. The biggest change right out the back was a clearly defined separation between the neck and the body. I shrank the tail's length, but I made it thicker to compensate, and made the cannon at the end bigger. I also changed the pose so it was pointing towards the camera and just made the design more dynamic. I swapped the direction of the V patterns across the body and replaced the light blue for the orange for color balancing, and so they would stand out more. They would glow blue in game when it was doing an attack. Just fun fact there. I made the arms and legs bigger since they were on the puny side in the original design. I cut down the number of dorsal plates but increased the size overall. I also added the elbow spike after seeing them on Evolved Godzilla in one of the early Godzilla X Kong trailers. Now this is worthy of the Big G himself. Konguard, the Mountain King Pokemon. Now compared to Big G, our secondary legendary Konguard here didn't need to change much in the reboot. Made our boy more top-heavy with bulkier arms, thicker but shorter legs, and a slightly bigger head. I upped the saturation on the color so the gold and pink popped more. I slightly redesigned the face so it had bigger eyes and a more pronounced muzzle/snout. Don't know which really applies better for a gorilla, terminology-wise. The metal textures across the body really do wonders in my eyes, mainly for the shoulder and the knee pads. I made the gray torso take up more space overall, and I moved the scar from the pectorals to the stomach area. I also made the feet bigger and then fixed the wonky perspective they had. A good update overall. Thundora, the Storm Tyrant Pokemon. Our final normal legendary of the region, the Storm King himself, Thundora. Obviously based on Big G's mortal enemy King Ghidorah, our electrical triple threat changed somewhere in the middle when looking at the spectrum of the other two legendaries. I shrank the lower body and thickened up the tail slightly so they weren't wet spaghetti noodles anymore. I made the claws on the feet bigger to feel more imposing. Same reasoning for making the wings thicker as well. I updated the rendering on the cloud membrane so it looked like it was buzzing with electricity inside. Proud of that one, if I'm allowing myself to feel arrogant, and made the electricity feel more full of energy. I made the head and neck thicker so they would read easier compared to the original draft. I swapped the light yellow I used for the horns and tail blades for the current brown for contrast, and made the orange underbelly extend slightly into the tails. I also made the body more of a gold color versus the dirty yellow of the original. Now this feels like a flying hurricane. Oh, you thought I was done? Nah, I saved the best for last. Thanks to the action of Team Ghoul in the background for centuries, Ultra Beasts have invaded the region and it's up to you to stop them. Let's go over the handful found only in the Vanik region, shall we? UB Hive, Fanflectum, the Mirror Pokemon. This is based on the Candyman from the titular movie series. This got the third biggest glow-up of the Ultra Beast unique to this region. Firstly, I removed the cape from the original draft and replaced it with the arms here to resemble Candyman's sick-ass coat, along with the fur collar. I made the stinger hook bigger and a separate piece from the body to stand out more. I rotated the main torso 180 degrees, so it has the current shape now. I kept the mirror honeycomb motif the same along with the central mirror of the chest. I swapped the colors around on the head and added the second set of eyes to feel more insect-like. This was easily the worst Ultra Beasts in the first draft. Thankfully, that is no longer the case here. UB Trap, Contortion, the Ensnarement Pokemon. This is based on Jigsaw and Billy the Puppet from the Saw series. This didn't change much as some of the other Ultra Beasts here, but this was a solid update. All the design elements are modeled after traps in the real world or ones unique to the movies. The head is a normal bear trap with the swirls from Billy cheeks acting as pseudo-eyes. The main body is the reverse bear trap from the movies. The bottom and top sections making it look like this Pokemon could have a face there. Hard to know which one is really in charge. Lastly, the legs are Chinese finger traps. I wanted something whimsical for them, and the pattern added a nice design element to the overall look. This was a normal steel type, but I changed it to a ground steel type for type balancing. Other than perspective changes, that's about it in terms of the redesign. This is a solid lad. UB Mimic, Ice Poster, the Assimilation Pokemon. Now this one got the biggest upgrade out of every single Ultra Beasts. No, the entire region. Based on the shapeshifter from the thing, specifically when it was disguised itself as the dog. The original design was trash. But I kept the design elements that worked from that design and the general color scheme. I wanted this Pokemon to feel the most alien out of every Ultra Beast, so I had it have no visible eyes on the head, but I moved them to the pseudo collar around the neck, added these spikes from the back for an intimidation factor, and I moved the barbed tentacles that were the arms in the first draft now to function as the tails. This is my favorite Ultra Beast of the entire region, only rivaled by the big boss at the end of Pokedex. The shiny is easily one of the cleanest I have ever done. You Be Mind, Crane Cthulhu, the Ancient Brain Pokemon. Based on the Lovecraftian monster Cthulhu and other great ones, I wanted this Pokemon to be fairly self-explanatory at a glance. It's a giant evil brain squid. In terms of redesign, this really didn't change much in comparison to Ice Poster. I changed the eyes to resemble those of a squid or a cuttlefish to feel more inhuman or in Pokemon, like in this case. I made these central tentacles thicker since I made the lower body smaller. I wanted the tentacles in the back to look like tiny spinal cords attached to the brain stem that is the lower body of this Pokemon. I added the wings here to break up the silhouette and gave it more Cthulhu elements. I also simplified the pattern on the main body. This was a good update overall. UB Puzzle, Steelament, the Puzzle Box Pokemon. This is based on the Lament configuration from the Hellraiser series. First off the bat, I changed the perspective of this Pokemon so I could get more consistent line work for the patterns. I changed the chain tentacles to feel more solid and less like actual chains this time around. I added the second pair in the back to help this feel more balanced overall and create a more interesting silhouette. The ends are actually supposed to resemble Leviathan from the film series. The main face in front is loosely modeled after Pinhead, with the eyes taking the place of said pins. Much like the actual configuration, I wanted each face of the cube to have a different pattern on it. The texture work is what completes this design for me. UB Trickster, Masquestion, the unrepressed Pokemon. Okay, this is the one and only exception of the rule to this region, with this being primarily based on the movie version of the mask. I could have cheated and said the comic version, but I had the movie in mind when I came up with it, and I'm not going to cheat. All of that said, this Ultra Beast changed the least out of all of them. I made the body and perspective more 3D to create a sense of depth with the features. I also made the central green more saturated and made the black sections of the body darker. Oh, I made the metal segment more vibrant to break up the colors. The biggest change came with the typing. It was Grass Ghost originally, but I swapped it to Grass Psychic since I was lacking in Psychic types, and it still performs the same central role in game and lore. UB Float, Terrorwise, the Spider Clown Pokemon. Based on Pennywise the Dancing Clown from the It series, mainly the remake in this case. This didn't change as much as some of the others. I made the thorax/clown head bigger to contrast with the rest of the body. I made the frill around the base of the thorax bigger to cover more of the actual Ultra Beast underneath. I shrank the limbs so they can be concealed by the neck frill. I also added the texture on top, and this baby was done. This still remains one of the best designs in the entire region. Oh, if you've been reading the Pokedex entries, this thing is Fauboug's boss. Just thought I'd add that in there. UB Treat, Sam Hollow, the Candy Spirit Pokemon. A personal favorite of mine, this is based on Sam from the Halloween classic Trick or Treat. This Ultra Beast is supposed to resemble the candy bags Sam drags around here and there during the events of the movie. The head and arms were modeled to look like lollipops, the hands in particular modeled around the ones Sam weaponized in the final segment of the film. In terms of redesign, I removed the eyes from the main head to feel more unnatural, and I couldn't get it to look right. I frayed the edges of the sack/torso, and I made the rope around the neck more prevalent here. I also made the lollipop hands more 3D, and I changed the feet shape ever so slightly to give them that little elf shoe look. UB Glitch, Missing No, the Corrupted Data Pokemon. The final boss of the region, Missing No is based on a praying mantis in every corrupted AI movie. Take your pick. This got the second biggest redesign of the Ultra Beast. The original, while unique, didn't look like a Pokemon whatsoever and was really overcomplicated. I modeled it after a praying mantis because I wanted to. I wanted more of an animal basis for the design. That, and I figured I could make the glitchy nature of the original design work really well with the claws and antenna here. I kept the colors the same from the original draft and the original Missing No sprite, for that matter. I wanted this Pokemon to look like a glitch in reality, which is why portions of it are breaking off and coming undone. This Pokemon would be a really really hard fight in the hypothetical game, which is why I gave it Reality Flicker, just to crush players' dreams. I am so happy I was finally able to make Missing No the electrical demon it was meant to be. Whew! And that is all of them for the base region of the Vanik reboot. Normally, I would go into the DLC at this point, but I haven't designed those mons yet, even if they are planned out at this point. When the DLC is done, I'll post it as its own video. Hopefully this should cut down on the rendering time substantially, but I'm not that hopeful looking at the current runtime as I edit this. Anyway, I want to thank anyone who watched all the way to the end. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more Fakemon content in the future. I haven't decided on what I'm going to do for the next video topic. I have a few things I could do, so keep an eye on my community tab just in case I put up a poll. This is Austin, signing out.